Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm gonna be making this cute butterfly brooch and telling you guys about Grigori Rasputin.
Grigori.
Why Rasputin though, of all people? Well, because I recently saw this. He's always shown in the most ridiculous, grotesque way possible. I mean, he's a Nazi helper, evil witcher in Hellboy, a caricature Disney-like villain in the movie Anastasia, and from what I could see in the trailer, cause I haven't seen the movie, a ninja monk or whatever the hell in Kingsman. Like, I can literally think of two instances where he is portrayed more or less like a human, in the Boney M song, and that time when he battled Stalin in epic rap battles. And yes, I understand that media doesn't always showcase people historically accurate, so I decided to take it upon myself and give you guys a more realistic account of who he actually was, based on the available information. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has watched my previous video. I mean, at this point I have like 200 views, which is amazing. I totally did not expect that. And I'm also sorry that I've been MIA, like my depression has been a complete bitch to me lately, like extra fucking mean. So I'm hoping I'm getting back on track with this one. Okay, so it is said that Rasputin was an unusual person from the get-go, but I'll just give you a little bit of a background. What we do know is that he was born in 1869 in a small Siberian village of Pokrovsk to a family of peasants. Throughout his earlier years, he had a fair share of run-ins with the law. He was a heavy drinker, was sleeping around, committed thefts, and reportedly even stole horses. But we'll come to that later. He got married in 1890 to a peasant girl named Praskovia and had 7 children with her, although sadly only 3 survived to adulthood. One of his children, Maria, would later document all of her father's miracles, literally from his own words, which I find so convenient. Like, you yourself can be a credible source of your own supernatural powers, right? Like, did you know that I could, I don't know, fly or like talk to animals when I was 12? Well, the worst part is that people actually believed her and found her writings convincing. So, according to Maria's writings, Rasputin performed his first miracle at the age of 12. At that time, he was sick, lying in bed with a fever. Somebody had stolen a horse from one of the villages. Rasputin stood up from his bed, came outside and pointed at a man standing near his father and said, "It's him who stole the horse." Other villagers got suspicious, followed the man home and found the stolen horse there. I'm obviously not gonna dwell on trying to determine how truthful this account is. You can easily make your own conclusions. Rasputin was a known rake and a thief in the village. He openly cheated on his wife, harassed local girls, kissed and touched them without their consent, and was often caught taking other people's things and selling them to buy booze. Here's one instance of that. Rasputin was caught stealing his neighbor's fence. I don't know, for maybe, to use it as firewood later on or something, but he was chopping pieces off of the fence with an axe and into a cart. Kartavtsev, Rasputin's neighbor, whose fence he was destroying, saw the act, beat Rasputin up, and took him to the local authorities. I don't know if he was charged with anything this time, but local police was already very well aware of Rasputin's habits. Later in 1897, a couple of horses were stolen from the same neighbor Kartavtsev, and because of Rasputin's reputation, he was swiftly accused of the crime along with his 2 friends. There was enough evidence to convict his friends and exile them from the village for good. But when it came to Rasputin himself, evidence just wasn't compelling enough for a permanent exile, so the decision was made to ban him from the village for some time. Rasputin suggested that instead of this exile, he would go on a pilgrimage. Village folk agreed, low-key hoping he'd become more spiritual, change his ways, finally turn into a decent member of society, and he did change. But not how they thought he would. Anyway, that was his first pilgrimage. I'm not gonna get into too much detail about it, like where he went to, etc., but here are a couple of important points. During his pilgrimage, he learned how to read and write. Before that, he was completely illiterate. He made a lot of connections and friends among the religious higher-ups. And finally, this pilgrimage did help him to sort of rebrand himself. He changed his looks and behavior. It's hard to say if he did actually become spiritual or it was just for show, but in any ways, he went beyond the doctrines of the traditional orthodoxy in his quote-unquote beliefs. When Rasputin returned home, he was a different man. He got rid of his old habits of drinking and smoking and had transformed from a local drunk to a mysterious strannik, which literally means pilgrim or a strider in Russian. He also acquired a peculiar way of looking at people. Literally, he started staring at people funny. Like, everyone knows this about him, right? His most famous feature was his eyes. They bore into people, like he was looking straight into people's souls. I find it interesting that even though his eyes were at some point called like the most famous eyes in Imperial Russia, nobody could actually remember their color. They were described as blue, gray, brown, or a mix of different colors. But none of this is really important, so I digress. The village folk was divided into those who felt uncomfortable by his weird staring and those who felt mesmerized by it, assigning Rasputin's eyes and himself supernatural powers. Like he could see what others couldn't, could heal, and even hypnotize. He himself never tried to disprove it, of course. As you can imagine, these people were ready to follow Rasputin and believe in any of his teachings, no matter how outrageous they were. And that he had a few. You see, Rasputin really got into the religious movement called Khlisti and combined their rituals with the doctrines of orthodoxy. I read that he didn't want to be a follower of any particular belief system, so he combined the two, creating his own teaching and making himself the sole leader of it. Now, Khlist means a whip in Russian. This movement, or should I say a sect, really, an offshoot of the Russian Orthodox Church, was called this way because one of their main rituals was to beat each other with whips. Khlisti believed that only by sinning one can reach salvation and find God. Thus, after beating each other with whips, they would all have an orgy together, because during the peak moment of pleasure, they could get closer to God. That's what they believed in. Traditionally, sleeping with other people before and outside marriage is considered a huge sin, so they kind of fought fire with fire. As any other sect back then, Khlisti were illegal, so Rasputin and his followers had to meet in secret. He organized a meeting spot in the cellar of his own house where he and his followers could perform their rituals. By the way, he was already married with children at that point. They would also meet in public bathhouses, and rumors started spreading that Rasputin was, healing, saving people, mainly women, from sin. Reportedly, 2 women died from Rasputin's healing. Like he literally unalived them by beating them with a whip. And 1 woman was allegedly essayed by him. Now, if that was true, and it's very hard to determine if it was, I fail to see how anyone could think he was holy in any way. Like this dude had to be put behind bars and not preach weird shit to people. But I guess as per usual, these women came to him, so they should have known better, right? Anyway, I read that he actually tried to stop himself from quote-unquote sinning with women, like his main goal was to control his desires and try to resist temptation. His wife even allegedly said that for him, sexual desire was a burden and not a pleasure. Just imagine being that good at gaslighting. And yeah, his will apparently wasn't too strong. Lo and behold, the villagers and the authorities got suspicious of his practices, and even an official investigation was opened. I mean, if 2 women died and 1 was essayed, there should be enough to charge him, but he was cleared and the investigation was closed. The villagers, however, knew that the guy was full of shit, and they met him with hostility. So it was the time for the second pilgrimage, and Rasputin went to Kazan. There, he befriended a lot of church's elites, local nobility, and ordinary people also liked him. Word of a mysterious traveler was spreading around very fast, and he became famous. That was a level up for Rasputin. Everyone now called him a saint, a man of God, and a starets. Starets literally means an old man in Russian, but in this case, it has no actual correlation to age. In Orthodox Church, the title starets is usually given to someone who is very wise and knowledgeable, who could teach and provide spiritual guidance, and not necessarily old. Fun fact, historians say that Rasputin often lied about his age to appear older so that he could seem wiser, I guess. It was a very good moment for Rasputin. You see, common folk didn't fancy the complete incompetence of the Tsar, the government, the rich, and the Russian Orthodox Church with them, because of its tight connection with the state. Rasputin, on the other hand, was an ordinary man, muzhik, a peasant, that on the surface didn't have any bonds with the ruling class. So when somebody like Rasputin appeared, proclaiming himself holy, people listened. I mean, people were illiterate, uneducated, living in very harsh conditions. They just had to believe in something, and when the official church couldn't meet their spiritual needs, they became more inclined to believe in the holiness of any random peasant pilgrim that looked mysterious. The church, knowing its flaws, low-key sought the help of people like Rasputin, publicly supported them all, trying to become appealing again and gain people's respect back. Through the church's support and other connections he got in Kazan, Rasputin had swiftly moved, or should I say, promoted himself to St. Petersburg, the capital city of the Russian Empire at the time, a political, economic, cultural, and religious center, so it was a huge deal. In the capital, he continued his practices and also very quickly became friends with the local higher-ups in church and the local elites. The former were trying to increase their influence, as I said before, and the latter, well, for them hanging out with the starets was kinda trendy. I'll get to that in a sec. Side note, there is a misconception that Rasputin was always dirty, with greasy hair, shitty cheap clothes, whilst in actuality he was quite vain about his appearance. He regularly combed his hair, used public bathhouses, and was dressed very well too, because his rich clients/friends gifted him nice expensive clothes. But anyways, there were two friends of his that were particularly important, Grand Duchesses Militsa and Stana, both of whom were married to the members of the Russian royal family, and who happened to be in very close relationship with Tsarina Alexandra. Rasputin, with his eyes, his way of speaking, certainly had an intriguing aura of mystery around him. So Grand Duchesses got convinced that he is the man that Tsarina might want to meet. And this is pretty much how Rasputin managed to become close with the royals, within just a year after moving to St. Petersburg. But how and why was it so easy? Well, Russian nobility was absolutely obsessed with everything mysterious, spiritual, and occult. So listening to and having around different saints, stranniks, etc. was super common and on trend. Royal family wasn't an exception. Rasputin wasn't the first holy man to hang out with the royals. Before he even came to St. Petersburg, there was a guy named Dr. Papu, a specialist in magic and occultism, who was helping Tsar Nicholas II to summon the spirit of his father, Alexander III, so that Nicholas could get political advice from him. Weirdly enough, Alexander III, for some reason, never taught his son Nicholas how to rule the empire, so Nicholas had pretty much no clue and hoped to get some information from the seances they had with Papu. After Papu left, there was a French man called Dr. Philippe Nizier, who claimed to be a miracle doctor and a reincarnation of Jesus. Yeah. Oh, and he wasn't a real doctor, of course. Nicholas was so into this guy, he asked the French government to give Nizier an official doctor's diploma. They refused because he had to, study, have an education, pass exams, etc. But that didn't stop Nicholas. Oh no. He himself gave this man a doctor's diploma. Anyway, this Dr. Nizier was consulting Tsarina Alexandra on how to give birth to a boy. You see, Alexandra already had 4 children at the time, but all of them happened to be girls, so there was no crown prince to inherit the throne. She was worried that she wouldn't be able to fulfill her duties of giving birth to a son, so Dr. Nizier came to the rescue. He managed to convince Tsarina that she was pregnant with a boy. Everyone was informed, it was a huge deal, and everyone was super happy. Tsarina even felt like she was indeed pregnant, but she refused to see an actual doctor. Didn't she know that her husband gave this Nizier guy a fake diploma? I don't know. Anyways, it turned out to be a false pregnancy. She literally wasn't pregnant at all. I don't blame her too much. I mean, I understand that she was desperate, but the royal family had to lie to the public that Alexandra had a miscarriage to avoid humiliation. The self-proclaimed reincarnation of Jesus, having lost the trust of the royals, had to flee to France. Then, a couple of other magical people followed, like it wasn't enough, but I'm not gonna dwell on this. Everyone was just so keen to profit on Tsar's insecurity and his wife's desperation. In 1904, their prayers were finally heard and Alexandra had given birth to a boy, Alexei. Unfortunately, though, the boy had haemophilia, which is a genetic disorder that impairs the blood's ability to clot. So it can lead to spontaneous bleeding and bleeding following injuries that is very, very hard to stop, especially at that day and age. Back then, doctors had absolutely no idea how to treat this illness, and people who had it usually died in their teens because even a small injury could be fatal. And this is when Rasputin comes into the picture. Tsarina was convinced, I guess by the Grand Duchesses, that he was the only person who could heal her boy. Whenever Rasputin came to see Alexei, his magic, or whatever powers he had, seemed to be working, and the boy felt better. So, does it mean that Rasputin was indeed effective at magically healing Alexei? I personally don't think so. Let's look as to why it can be a huge coincidence and why I think there was actually nothing supernatural there. As I said before, haemophilia is very dangerous because it can cause external and internal bleeding. It is extremely painful, and the bleeding, if untreated, can go for days. But in some cases, it can stop by itself. Trigger warning, I'm going to explain how it stops. And it's quite graphic, so skip to the next part on the timeline if you don't want to hear that. Okay, I'm not a medical professional, but this is the information I was able to find. In some cases, when the internal bleeding is happening, there is so much blood that it has no place to go. The bleeding continues to the point when there is a big bubble of blood that acts like a natural pressure band that pushes against the veins and arteries, thus making the bleeding stop. I'm not going to include pictures, Google at your own risk. Now, I'm not 100% certain that this is exactly what's been happening to Alexei, but some historians suggest that it might be the case. Also, Rasputin never showed up in the beginning of the bleeding episode. So every time Alexei's illness started to take over, Rasputin was like,
"Look to my coming, at first light on the 5th day."
Okay, I don't actually think that he did this on purpose. In actuality, it took some time for the news to get to him, plus time to get to where Alexei was. Traveling wasn't easy, so Rasputin usually arrived on the 3rd, 4th day, or even later. So by that time, the bleeding could have naturally slowed down, thus prompting an improvement in Alexei's condition. No magic. Also, whenever he arrived, he told Tsarina to keep actual doctors away from the crown prince. You see, haemophilia causes severe pain, and back then aspirin was the go-to painkiller. Aspirin is a blood thinner, so it further prevents blood clots from forming, making the situation for the haemophiliac much worse. After Rasputin arrived, doctors were dismissed, meaning no more aspirin was given to the boy. Hence, the blood was getting thicker, hence the improvement followed. Another point I want to make is Rasputin most probably helped Tsarina and Alexei calm down. They believed in his healing abilities, so for them everything he said and did must have felt convincing. Upon coming, he would talk to both of them, cheered them up, prayed with them, and as a result reduced their stress. Whenever you're stressed, your body releases adrenaline, which slows blood clotting process. In other words, the calmer the crown prince got, the thicker his blood was. In my opinion, all of these points are valid and make sense. There was no magic involved, more like solid, logical explanation for Rasputin's effectiveness. Also, I just want to add that Rasputin reportedly failed to heal anyone other than Alexei. Like Tsarina had a friend that was experiencing constant back pains, but she saw no improvement after Rasputin's visits. What else has been said about Rasputin? Oh yeah, that he was involved in state affairs and slept with Tsarina. I haven't found any credible source that would suggest that he did any of that. Only rumors that were spread both during his lifetime and after. Yes, he had an influence over Tsarina in a spiritual way, but Nicholas, not so much. He accepted Rasputin because of his son, but other than that, they rarely communicated and only met maybe a couple of times. Also, it is true that Tsarina sent a bunch of letters to Nicholas saying that their friend, meaning Rasputin, was suggesting this or that he blessed Nicholas to do this or that. But according to historians, Tsar rarely followed this advice. He was like, yeah, okay, just to appease his wife. Some people blame Rasputin for the collapse of the empire, but it couldn't be further from the truth. Apart from food shortages, lack of technological advancement, 80% illiteracy rate, and 2 lost wars, the First World War and Russo-Japanese War, the empire was doomed a long time before Rasputin was even born. Like, I think it started with the state-approved slavery of the country's own people called serfdom that lasted for 2 centuries. But that's a completely different topic. Rasputin was a controversial figure and had a fair share of enemies. The rumors that he was low-key ruling the country, controlling Nicholas's every move, sleeping with Tsarina, and was some sort of a devil in flesh was spreading like wildfire. He himself seemed to be very proud of those rumors and actually played into them a lot, boasting about his influence over the royals, mockingly calling them mommy and daddy. As you can imagine, all of this made a lot of people turn against Rasputin, and some were even ready to make a move and get rid of him. Thus, two noblemen, Felix Yusupov and Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, organized his assassination. There were other people involved, but their personas are not crucial to the story, so I'm just going to omit their names. Rasputin was lured into Felix's house and subsequently attacked and killed. Now, you may have heard of Rasputin as a man who could not be killed. Allegedly, during that night in the Yusupov's house, Rasputin was poisoned with cyanide-infused cakes, shot multiple times, stabbed, then shot some more, all while still remaining alive. He even actively resisted his attackers, but they overpowered him, brought him to the river where he had finally drowned. This is all according to the legend. Now let's talk about why the story is most probably a hoax. The myth of Rasputin's near immortality was literally born in the memoirs of his attackers, many years later. Like, legit. There is no other witness account, no evidence or really anything that would suggest that this story had ever taken place, other than Rasputin's killer's memoirs. Why they did this? Like, what for, you may ask? Well, I think it happened for two main reasons. Reason number one, they were trying to justify his murder. Humans aren't so difficult to kill, so it means that Rasputin wasn't totally human, which plays into the narrative that he was some sort of a satanic, demon-like creature, so it was okay to kill him. Reason number two, they tried to create hype around their memoirs to sell them. After Yusupov immigrated to Europe, he didn't have a lot of money, but selling a story of him killing such an odious figure, plus in such a crazy way, could potentially earn him a couple of coins. There also was no cyanide in the cakes. The person who was supposed to poison them was an actual practicing physician. Later in life, he confessed that he just couldn't do it because he gave the Hippocratic oath to never harm anyone. Another thing I've read was that the river was actually frozen, so Rasputin couldn't have drowned, although some historians say that he was thrown into the hole in the ice used for fishing. What is certain is that there was no water in his lungs. The autopsy showed that Rasputin was shot 4 times, and each of the shots was determined to be lethal. He also had wounds on his head, but all of them were left post-mortem, meaning he probably died very quickly after the shots and was already dead when thrown into the water. So no superpowers. Another interesting theory I found was that Rasputin was killed by an agent of MI6 because he was a German spy conspiring with Tsarina Alexandra and together influencing Tsar's political decisions. You see, Tsarina was German, so Britain feared that Russia and Germany would become buddies during the First World War and together turn against Britain. It's hard to say how true this theory is though. Oh, and by the way, Rasputin's attackers weren't punished. Because of their high status, one of them was a Grand Duke, they couldn't be judged by a regular court, and only the Emperor could give them a sentence. Nicholas didn't punish them though, which actually kinda proves that Tsar didn't really care about Rasputin too much. So instead, he banned them from St. Petersburg for some time, and they just simply moved to their villas. So there were no miracles, other than the miracle of the judicial system. Having done my research, I can say that I haven't found any evidence of Rasputin's superpowers. Judging by his earlier life, his rise to power and fame, the way he used the gullibility and vulnerability of Tsarina, as well as the crisis of monarchy and church to his advantage, it's just all too convenient to be an accident. Maybe he did believe in God and was religious in his own way, but he still used his circumstances very well to get ahead. I personally think that he was an intelligent, skillful, and talented con artist who happened to be in the right time and in the right place. And that's about it. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you. You're the real one. Tell me what you think about the story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks once again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye.